Hi everyone. Tell us where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe and give a thumbs up. Enjoy the story. At her nephew's birthday party, Agata's mother-in-law said out loud, "Everyone here has kids. Only you are useless." Her husband stayed silent, but that same evening he threw her out. 3 years later, she came back to her hometown holding twins in her arms. You should have seen their faces when they found out who the father was. But to understand how it came to this, we need to go back 3 years, to the day that split Agata's life into before and after. That day started with a quiet hope and ended with a slammed door and cold rain pouring down. The Empire restaurant was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. They were celebrating little Lyosha's 5th birthday. He was the son of Philip's sister. Agata's mother-in-law, Bronislava Arkadyevna, loved events like this. Not so much for the grandchild, but for the chance to gather all the family, business partners, and important people under one roof to show off the Belikov family's power and unity. The air was thick with expensive perfume, roasted meat, and the squeals of children. Boys and girls in fancy suits and frilly dresses ran between tables, almost knocking over glasses of champagne or plates of appetizers. Agata sat quietly at the table, hiding her cold hands under the tablecloth. She felt like an outsider at someone else's celebration. Everyone else was in pairs, families, or groups. Parents with kids, grandparents with grandkids. Philip's cousin Karina was holding her chubby baby, whispering to him. A family friend, some local official, was tossing his giggling daughter in the air. Everywhere Agata looked, families. And she was just Philip's wife, an accessory to him. Lyosha, the birthday boy, ran past and smeared something sticky and chocolatey on her sleeve. Agata pulled out a wet wipe and started cleaning the stain from her simple gray dress. Just then Philip's aunt, a plump woman in a bright burgundy outfit, came over. "Agata dear, why are you sitting here alone like an orphan?" she sang out, a cloud of sweet perfume hitting her in the face. "Go look at all the lovely children. It's your turn too, my dear. Time's ticking, you know." Agata felt her cheeks burn. She mumbled something about everything in its own time. The aunt gave her a pitying smile and walked away. It wasn't the first comment that night. More like the third or fourth. First it was Philip's business partner's wife asking, "Still not planning kids?" Then a distant relative telling her how her daughter barely managed to have a baby before 35. Every word felt like a small stone thrown at her. Not meant to be cruel, but each one reminded her of her failure, of the emptiness she couldn't fill. She and Philip had been married 5 years. That morning the doctor had told her, "Keep trying, it should work," but the years kept passing with no result. The pressure from Philip's family, especially Bronislava, was getting unbearable. Tonight Bronislava was in her element. In a perfectly tailored black suit, hair in an elegant updo, pearls around her neck, she moved through the room like a queen. She chatted briefly with guests, offering her cold, polite smile. Agata could feel her mother-in-law's eyes on her all the time, judging, weighing. Bronislava never attacked her directly. Her weapon was sharp hints, half-sentences, little remarks to no one in particular, that were clearly meant for Agata. Then the huge pirate ship-shaped cake was brought out. The children gathered around, eyes shining. Lyosha blew out the candles to a round of applause. His parents, Philip's sister and her husband, stood hugging their son. Bronislava walked over, kissed her grandson on the head, and in the sudden quiet before the music started again, she raised her voice. "Look at this happiness," she said, motioning to her daughter and family. "Everyone has children, everyone is doing their part. Only you, Agata, are useless." The word fell into the silence like a stone into deep water, calm, cold, and final. Dozens of eyes turned toward Agata. She felt the blood drain from her face. The whole world seemed to shrink until all she could see was her husband's face. She stared at him, silently begging, "Say something. Defend me." But Philip didn't even look at her. He just stared down at his plate, picked up his fork, and started poking at what was left of his salad. His silence was louder than any scream. It was a verdict. He agreed with his mother. He thought the same. In that moment, Agata realized she was completely alone, in a room full of people. Someone coughed awkwardly. The music started again. The party rolled on, crushing her like a steamroller. For her, the night was already over. She sat like a statue, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, just waiting for the moment she could leave. The ride home was painfully silent. Agata stared out the window at the blurred city lights. Rain began to fall, heavy drops drumming on the car roof. Philip drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his profile hard and distant. She wanted to scream, to ask why he stayed silent, why he let his mother humiliate her. But she already knew the answer. His silence at the restaurant had said everything. When they got home, the same apartment they had lovingly decorated 5 years earlier, Philip didn't even take off his coat. He stood in the hallway and looked at her with cold, empty eyes. There was no sympathy, no regret. Just a wall. "Mother's right," he said flatly. "I need a real family." Agata froze, not believing what she'd heard. "This can't be real. It's a nightmare." "What?" she whispered. "Philip, what are you saying?" "Pack your things," he cut her off. Those 3 words knocked the air out of her. 5 years of marriage, all their hopes and dreams, turning to dust in seconds. "But where will I go?" Her voice trembled. "That's not my problem," he said coldly, turning away. "You have half an hour." He walked into the other room, leaving her in the hallway. She stood there, swaying, holding onto the wall to keep from falling. 30 minutes. That's all she had to erase herself from his life. On shaking legs, she went to the bedroom and opened the closet. There were her dresses, his shirts, their life together. She started pulling out her clothes mechanically, stuffing them into the first sports bag she found. Toothbrush, sweater, pair of jeans. What else? Her mind was blank, her hands numb. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't notice. Philip stood in the doorway watching her, not like a husband but like a prison guard. He didn't offer help, not money, not even a word. Just waited for her to be gone. When she zipped the bag, he silently opened the front door. The gesture said more than words ever could. She stepped into the hallway. The door slammed behind her. The lock clicked. It was over. Agata walked down the stairs, out into the cold autumn rain. It soaked her thin coat instantly. She walked without knowing where, the empty streets shining under the streetlights, their reflections trembling on the wet asphalt. "Useless. I need a real family." His words pounded in her head like a hammer. She walked until her legs almost gave out from exhaustion and cold. Tears mixed with the rain, running down her face, down her neck, under her collar. She stopped under the awning of a closed shop and reached into her bag to find a tissue. Her fingers felt the keys, her wallet, lipstick, and then something small and hard, a little cardboard box. Her heart skipped a beat. She pulled it out, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it onto the wet pavement. It was the box she had bought that morning. After her appointment with the doctor, after his encouraging words, she had stopped at a pharmacy on impulse. She took the test right there in the shopping mall restroom. When she saw the result, her breath caught. 2 bright, clear lines. She couldn't believe her eyes. The joy was overwhelming. So strong she wanted to scream it to the world. She decided she would tell Philip that evening after the party. It would be their little secret, their victory over everything. This child would be the glue to fix their marriage, silence the relatives, and finally make them happy. And now, standing in the rain, humiliated and thrown out, Agata stared at the box in her hand. She opened it. Inside was the small plastic test with 2 lines. She was pregnant. And the man who had just kicked her out for being childless was the father. Her secret joy, her hope for saving everything, had turned to ash. The cruelest joke life could have played. 2 pink lines on a small piece of plastic, shaking in her rain-soaked hand. Agata looked at the test in her hand, and the world that had just collapsed suddenly stopped falling. It was hanging there in empty space. She was no longer truly alone. There was life inside her. His life. A child he didn't want from the woman he had called useless. A bitter, silent laugh stuck in her throat. The cold rain soaked her to the bone, and she knew she couldn't stay out on the street. But where could she go? Her parents lived in the same city. If she showed up there, the gossip would reach them instantly. Bronislava would make sure of that. She imagined her mother crying, her father sitting in heavy silence, not knowing how to deal with the shame of a daughter thrown out by her husband. Well, she couldn't do that to them. Not now. One name flashed in her mind. Lena, her friend from university. They hadn't been in close touch for years, but theirs was the kind of friendship that doesn't rust. Lena lived far away in Yaroslavl. Far enough that the scandal wouldn't reach her. Agata pulled out her phone. The battery was almost dead. She quickly dialed Lena's number. Each ring felt like forever. "Hello," came Lena's sleepy voice. "Len, it's Agata." Her own voice sounded hoarse and strange. "Agata, what happened? Are you crying?" "Lena, can I come to you? Just for a couple of days." The words were hard to get out. Silence for a moment, then Lena's firm, steady reply. "Not for a couple of days. For as long as you need. Come, whatever happened, just come." In those few words, there was more warmth and support than Agata had felt in her entire 5-year marriage. She hung up before she broke down again. The phone went dark. Yaroslavl. That meant the train station. She flagged down a rare late-night taxi, gave the driver the station's address, and stared out the window at the city that had once been her home and now felt like enemy territory. She was leaving everything behind. Her apartment, her life, her husband. The night train was almost empty. She sat in a corner seat by the window, clutching her bag like a life preserver. She didn't sleep at all, her mind repeating just 2 words over and over. Useless and pregnant. They collided in her head, refusing to let her rest. By morning, as the train rolled into Yaroslavl, something inside her had shifted. The pain was still there, but now it was covered by a thin, cold layer of steel-hard determination. They would never know. Not Philip, not his mother. They had erased her from their lives. Now she would erase them from hers. This child would be hers alone. He would never know the father who rejected him before he was even born. He would never meet the grandmother who called his mother useless. That was her decision. Solid as iron. Lena met her on the platform. She didn't ask questions, just hugged her tightly, took the bag and led her to the car. Lena's small but cozy one-room apartment smelled of coffee and peace. For the first time in 24 hours, Agata could breathe. She told Lena almost everything. About the humiliation at the party, Bronislava's words, Philip throwing her out. She left out only one thing, the little box now lying at the bottom of her bag. That was her secret, her anchor in this stormy new world. The first weeks passed in a haze. Agata slept, catching up on all the nights lost to tears and worry. She helped Lena around the house, cooked, and stayed mostly quiet. Lena was the perfect friend. She didn't pry, didn't give advice. She just stayed close. But Agata knew she couldn't live off her friend forever. She needed to stand on her own feet, for herself and for the life growing inside her. The first step was seeing a doctor. She booked an appointment at a regular women's clinic, using her maiden name, Polikova. Sitting in the waiting room among other pregnant women, she felt like an imposter. They all seemed to have husbands, support, a future. All she had was a past she'd run from, and a foggy, uncertain present. In the ultrasound room the air was cool. A young doctor with a tired but kind face spread cold gel on Agata's stomach and moved the probe. "Well, let's see what we've got here," she murmured, studying the screen. Agata held her breath, staring at the fuzzy black and white image, trying to make out anything at all. "All right, pregnancy is in the uterus, about 12 weeks along. Everything looks good, developing right on time. Strong heartbeat." Agata let out a long breath. Thank God. Everything was fine. Then the doctor went quiet, narrowed her eyes, and slid the probe slightly to the side. She made a small, thoughtful sound. "Interesting," the doctor said slowly. Well, Mommy, did you know there's a surprise for you? Agata's heart sank. A surprise. What did that mean? Something was wrong. The doctor smiled and turned the monitor toward her. Oh, everything's fine. It's just, you don't have one heartbeat here, you have two. Agata stared at the screen, completely confused. The doctor pointed at one flashing spot, then another. Here's one, and here's the other. Congratulations. You're having twins. Twins. The word hung in the air. Not one baby, two. Her secret, her burden, her hope, everything had just doubled. Tears started rolling down her cheeks again, but this time they weren't from sadness. It was a wild mix of fear and joy. She was alone with no money, no job in a strange city. And she was going to have two babies. It was crazy, and the most beautiful thing she had ever heard in her life. Back at Lena's apartment, Agata was in a daze. She would need more strength, more determination. She started unpacking her one small bag to make space for future baby things. There wasn't much from her past life. Some clothes, makeup, a couple of books, and a small worn notebook with a hard cover. She recognized it immediately. It was the diary of Anna Sergeevna, her husband Philip's grandmother, who had died a year before their wedding. The notebook had ended up with Agata along with other old papers, and she had shoved it on a shelf, meaning to give it to Bronislava, Philip's mother, one day. She must have accidentally packed it with her books when she left. At first, she wanted to throw it away. It was a reminder of a family she wanted to forget. But something stopped her. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a need for answers. She sat on the couch and opened the first page. The handwriting was neat and tidy. Mostly small notes about the weather, the garden, the grandchildren. Agata flipped through, barely reading, until her eyes caught a familiar name. Bronislava. The entry was from many years ago, when Philip was still a boy. May 15th. Another difficult talk with Bronislava. Again she started about having an heir. My heart breaks for my son, my Tolia. The doctors say the chances are small. But that's not a death sentence. And Bronislava seems to have lost her mind, running from doctor to doctor, demanding, searching for solutions. Yesterday she came with wild eyes, saying that if her husband can't do it, we have to find another way so the family name doesn't die out. That the family honor is more important than anything. I'm afraid of her. There's some dark, dangerous fire in her. Obsession is not from God. It seems she's ready to do anything to get this heir. Anything. Gotta read the lines again. Tolia was Anatoly, Bronislava's husband, Philip's father. He had trouble having children. And already 30 years ago, Bronislava had been obsessed with getting an heir, ready to go to any lengths. A chill ran down Agata's spine. She had always thought her mother-in-law's attacks were personal, that her cruelty came from the 5 years of failed attempts Agata and Philip had to have a baby. But this diary said otherwise. This wasn't personal. It was an old, deep obsession, a family fixation she'd known nothing about. It wasn't just the whim of a controlling woman. It was a lifelong, almost insane mission. Agata snapped the diary shut. She felt uneasy. This was disturbing. She didn't know what to do with it. For a second, she wanted to call Philip and tell him, but she stopped herself. Oh. That door was closed. The past had to stay in the past. These were just old family dramas. Coincidence. She had no time to dig into other people's secrets. She had 2 of her own, soon to be born. She shoved the diary to the bottom of her bag under her sweaters, out of sight. That same evening, to shake off the bad thoughts, she did what always calmed her. She went to the kitchen and baked an apple pie. Simple, from her mother's recipe. The smell of cinnamon, vanilla, and baked apples filled the small apartment. When Lena came home from work, she gasped. The pie was delicious. The next day, Lena brought her more flour and sugar. Then Agata baked more. Cakes, pastries, buns. At first, just for herself and Lena. Then Lena took some to work. Her co-workers loved them. Soon came her first order for a birthday. Then a second. Then a third. Agata worked tirelessly, often late into the night. She was exhausted, her back ached, but when she pulled another golden-brown masterpiece from the oven, she felt satisfied. She was making things with her own hands. It wasn't useless. She was earning her first small, but truly her own money. She was no longer just someone's wife. She was Agata Polikova. And soon she would be a mother of two. That thought gave her strength. She pushed away the memories of Branislava's cruel words, of Philip's silence, of the sad lines in her old diary. Instead, she poured all her love and determination into dough, cream, and chocolate glaze. She was building a new life from scratch, alone. 3 years passed. 3 years that turned Agata from a broken victim into the owner of her own life. The scent of vanilla, fresh coffee, and dark chocolate became the smell of her new world. Her little pastry shop in the center of Yaroslavl was her fortress and her pride, a cozy place with a display full of delicate pastries and towering cakes. It even became a local attraction. Agata was no longer Philip's wife. She was Polikova, the woman who baked divine eclairs. Her mornings didn't start with an alarm clock, but with the soft sounds from the children's room. Misha and Masha, her greatest secret. Her 2 hearts living outside her body. They were her world. Both blonde with matching dimples, yet so different in personality. Misha, curious and loud, always exploring. Masha, quiet and thoughtful, an observer. Each morning she took them to kindergarten, then threw herself into work, ordering supplies, managing staff, inventing new recipes, taking orders. In the evenings she picked them up, and the 3 of them had dinner in their small rented apartment above the pastry shop. She read them bedtime stories, kissed the tops of their heads, and when they fell asleep, she felt complete happiness. She had made it. She had survived. The past was almost gone, locked away in an old diary at the bottom of a suitcase, in a part of her soul she didn't want to open. She knew nothing about Philip, about Branislava, about that old life, and she wanted it to stay that way. She had cut all ties, changed her phone number. Her only connection to her hometown was the occasional call to her parents from her friend Lena's landline. She told them she had moved for work, that she was doing fine. She never mentioned the children, afraid the news would somehow reach the Belikov family. She was protecting her kids from that poison. Then one evening, a call broke through the walls of her new life. It was her father. His voice was strained, unfamiliar. "Agata, your mother is very ill. It's her heart. She's in the hospital." Her world tilted. Her mother, her closest, dearest person. Intensive care. Heart attack. The words pounded in her head like hail against glass. No time for fear, for doubts, for old grudges. Her mother needed her. In an hour she packed the kids, explained to her assistant at the shop that she had to leave for family reasons, bought train tickets. All night, the clatter of the wheels kept her awake as she watched Misha and Masha sleeping, feeling the icy fear of returning fight with her worry for her mother. She was going back to the hell she had escaped from. Her hometown greeted her with gray skies and a damp, cold wind. Nothing had changed, the same streets, the same buildings. Only she was different. When her father met her at the station and saw 2 small children holding her hands, he froze. In his eyes was a storm of emotions. Shock, surprise, confusion, and a late-blooming tenderness. "Your grandchildren, Dad," Agata said softly. "Misha and Masha." In the hospital room, her mother looked small and fragile under the white sheet. But when she saw the twins, her pale face lit up with such a smile that Agata's breath caught. In that moment, she knew she had done the right thing. Coming back was worth it, just for this. But the town had already noticed her. Small towns live on gossip. The next day, when Agata went to the nearest store, her old neighbor Aunt Valya's eyes widened at the sight of 2 children clinging to Agata's hands. "Agataka, you're back. And whose sweet little kids are these?" she asked, her voice dripping with curiosity. Agata smiled politely, said nothing, and hurried away. But she knew the rumor mill had started. By evening, the whole neighborhood would know. Agata Polikova, once Belikova, the one whose husband kicked her out, had returned, and not alone but with 2 children. She tried not to go out unless she had to, spending her time either at her mother's bedside or with the kids at her parents' apartment. But a few days later, the doctor said her mother needed fresh fruit, especially pomegranates. Agata had to go to the main market. It was crowded and noisy, filled with the smell of fresh dill and ripe apples. She walked confidently between the stalls, holding Misha's and Masha's hands. For a while, she even forgot to be careful. She was too focused on finding the best, ripest pomegranates. She was paying the seller when Misha tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, look, a man," he said, pointing behind her. Agata turned and froze. A few meters away stood Philip. He looked almost the same. Same haircut, same expensive coat she once helped him choose. Only his face seemed harder now, with a few more lines around his eyes. He was staring at her, his expression full of shock. His eyes went from her to the two blonde children at her side, then back to her again. He had gone pale, as if he had just seen a ghost. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a beautiful young woman, shiny dark hair, perfect makeup, a sand-colored cashmere coat. She looked polished, confident, expensive. She glanced between Philip and Agata with clear confusion. It felt like an eternity before Philip finally moved. He stepped forward. "Agata!" His voice was hoarse. "Hello, Philip," she answered evenly, surprised at how calm she sounded. Inside, her chest felt tight and cold, but her voice didn't shake. She instinctively pulled Misha and Masha closer, almost shielding them. Philip looked at the woman next to him. It was obvious he didn't know what to do. Finally he said, "This is Uliana, my wife." The word hit like a slap. So here she was, the woman who had taken her place. The one Philip thought was worth throwing Agata out into the rain for. Agata looked at Uliana's perfect face, her expensive clothes, and felt that old pain return. But with it came something else, a cold, fierce pride. "Hello," Agata said sharply, without even looking at Uliana. Her eyes stayed on Philip. He stared at the children. His eyes were a storm, confusion, suspicion, curiosity. He opened his mouth to ask something but never did. The silence between them became almost unbearable. "We have to go," he finally said, taking Uliana's arm and almost dragging her away. He didn't say goodbye, just left. Agata watched them walk off. She saw his tense back, saw Uliana speaking to him in confusion. As they disappeared into the crowd, Uliana turned slightly, and Agata noticed something. Even under the loose coat, it was impossible to miss the round curve of a pregnant belly. Uliana wasn't just married to her ex-husband. She was expecting his child. Soon, Philip would have the heir his mother had always wanted, the one Agata had never been able to give. Useless Agata. She stood there in the noisy market, holding the pomegranate bag in one hand and her children's little hands in the other. The image of Uliana's pregnant belly burned into her mind like a camera flash. Rage rose inside her, not for herself but for Misha and Masha. Their father had replaced their mother without even knowing they existed. She turned and walked away with the children. That market meeting was like a stone starting an avalanche. The whole town was buzzing. Everyone now knew that Agata had come back with two children no one had ever seen before, and that her ex-husband, Philip Belaikov, was about to become a father again with his new wife. Gossip spread like a snake through every corner of the city. Agata knew it was only a matter of time before the main source of poison found her. She was right. A few days later, her mother was about to be discharged from the hospital. The weather was nice, so Agata took the children to a small park nearby. Misha and Masha were happily chasing pigeons while she sat on a bench, enjoying a rare moment of peace. She was so focused on watching them that she didn't notice a tall, straight figure in a familiar black coat stop beside her. "I knew you'd come back," came the cold, contemptuous voice. "Ran out of money." Agata slowly lifted her head. Bronislava Arkadyevna. She looked exactly the same as 3 years ago, the perfect hairstyle, the proud posture. But her eyes were even colder now. She glanced at Agata with open disdain, then looked at the children playing nearby. She dragged in those brats to make my son feel sorry for her, trying to pin someone else's kids on him. The words felt like a slap in the face. 3 years ago, Agata might have gotten upset, cried, and run away. But now, sitting across from Branislava, was a different woman, one who had spent the past 3 years building a life on her own and raising 2 children. Agata stood up. She was the same height as Branislava. She looked her straight in the eye, calm and cold. "These are my children, Branislava Arkadyevna. I'm asking you to stay away from them and from me." Branislava smirked. "Are you threatening me? You, the one my son tossed out like a stray cat. You've crawled back into our town to blackmail us, to shame our family before the birth of the rightful heir. I won't allow it." She raised her voice to draw attention from a few passers-by. But Agata didn't flinch. "I came here to care for my sick mother," she said firmly. "I'm not interested in your fantasies. If you ever come near me or my children again, I'll call the police." She called Misha and Masha over, took their hands and walked out of the park without looking back. She could feel Branislava's hateful stare burning into her back. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the start of a war. Back home, Agata sat in the kitchen for a long time, her hands trembling. She knew Branislava wouldn't stop. She'd spread rumors, turn people against her, try to paint her as a fraud. And the most vulnerable part of Agata's life, her children, had already been called someone else's brats by Branislava. She'd scream it on every street corner if she could. Agata needed to defend herself, and the best defense was attack. The next day she found a good lawyer online. A young, energetic woman named Inga listened to her story without interrupting. "They'll say you're a scammer," Inga said when Agata finished. "That the kids aren't his and you're just after money. Classic. We need to strike first. File for paternity and child support. Officially. Through court. Paternity test. DNA." The thought made Agata uncomfortable. It meant letting Philip into their lives again, at least formally. But Inga was right. This was the only way to shut Branislava up. An official document proving that Misha and Masha were Philip's children, and that Agata had every right to his financial support. It wasn't about the money. Agata was doing fine on her own. It was about the truth and protecting her children's honor. "Prepare the papers," Agata said firmly. A few days later, an official court summons was delivered to Philip Belaikov's office, a demand to take a paternity test. Agata had pulled the trigger. There was no going back now. She braced herself for the reaction. An angry call from Philip, new threats from Branislava. But instead, something completely unexpected happened. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, the doorbell rang at her mother's apartment. Agata looked through the peephole and froze. It was Uliana, Philip's wife, alone. She looked nothing like she had at the market. There was no arrogance, no gloss. She wore a simple dark dress, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was pale, without makeup, and her big eyes were filled with fear. Agata hesitated, then opened the door. "What do you want?" she asked coldly. "May I come in? Please, it's important. I don't want to talk in the hallway." Uliana's voice shook. Agata let her into the kitchen but didn't offer her a seat or tea. She just stood there with her arms crossed, waiting. Uliana glanced around nervously, like a cornered animal. "It's about the lawsuit," she began, fiddling with the strap of her expensive handbag. "Philip got the papers." "So," Agata said sharply. Uliana stepped closer. "I'm begging you, withdraw it. Drop the case." Agata smirked. "So you and your dear mother-in-law can keep telling the whole town I'm a tramp who brought back someone else's kids? No, thank you. That's not it. You don't understand." Uliana's voice dropped to a whisper. She set her bag on the table, opened it, and pulled out a thick leather briefcase. She snapped open the locks and revealed neat stacks of money. A lot of money. "Here," she said, exhaling sharply. "This is enough money for you to buy an apartment anywhere you want. Just leave and never come back. Just withdraw your complaint. Disappear. Please." Agata looked at the money, then at Uliana's frightened face. Something was wrong. This didn't feel like the arrogant revenge of a rich rival. It felt like desperation. "You think you can buy me?" Agata asked calmly. "You're wrong. I won't take your money. Please." Tears glistened in Uliana's eyes. "You don't understand what Branislava Arkadyevna is capable of. You have no idea. This test will destroy everything. For all of us, for me, for Philip, and for you too." Agata stared at her in confusion. The panic in Uliana's voice was real. But why? Why would Philip's new pregnant wife be so terrified of a test that should prove the twins weren't his, a result that would secure her place as the mother of his only legal heir? Why offer a fortune to stop something that should be in her favor? It made no sense, unless she had a terrible secret the test might reveal. "Get out," Agata said, pointing to the door. "And take your money with you." Uliana's face twisted in despair. She slowly closed her briefcase, snapped the locks shut, and left without another word. Agata locked the door behind her and leaned against it. Her heart was pounding. What was that? Why was Uliana so afraid of this test? Logic said a pregnant wife should want to prove her husband had no other heirs. Yet Uliana acted like this DNA test was a bomb that could destroy her entire life. Vague suspicions in Agata's mind began to take shape. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, not only with her own expulsion from the family, but with Uliana's sudden appearance, her pregnancy, and her terror of that test. Then Agata remembered. Philip's grandmother's old, worn diary, still at the bottom of her suitcase. There was an entry about Branislava's obsession with having an heir, about her husband's problems, and her willingness to do anything. Back then, Agata had dismissed it as old family drama. But now, after Uliana's visit, those words sounded different. Arker. She pulled out the diary and reread the page again and again, ready to do anything to get that heir. What if it wasn't just talk? What if it was a plan? The puzzle was starting to come together, but she was missing key pieces. She needed someone who had known the Belaikov family for a long time, someone she could trust. She remembered Mark Antonovich, the family's old doctor, who had even treated her when she was a child. He was a friend of her parents, a kind, silver-haired man with sharp eyes. He had retired long ago but still kept a small private practice. He knew the Belikovs well, even before they became so powerful. She needed an excuse to visit him. A routine checkup for the kids would be perfect cover. The next day she called him. Mark Antonovich was happy to hear her voice, asked about her mother, and wished her good health. He readily agreed to see her and the children in his office, which was in his large old house. The place smelled of medicine and old books, just like in her childhood. There was a heavy oak desk, glass cabinets with instruments, and an anatomy chart on the wall. He was gentle with Misha and Masha, examined them carefully, listened to their breathing, checked their throats, and said they were perfectly healthy and developing well. When the checkup was done and the kids were distracted by the fish tank in the corner, Agata decided to take a chance. "Mark Antonovich," she began carefully, "I was going through some old things and found something interesting. Anna Sergeyevna's diary. You know, Philip's grandmother." The doctor looked up from his papers. "Yes, I remember her. A wonderful woman. Not like... Well, never mind. There are some strange notes in it," Agata went on, watching his reaction closely. "About her son Anatoly, Branislava's husband, and about how Branislava was obsessed with having an heir. They said they'd had some trouble with this years ago. But when Agata mentioned Branislava and the heir, the friendly look on Dr. Mark Antonovich's face disappeared. He stiffened, took off his glasses, wiped them and put them back on. His fingers tapped nervously on the table. "Old business, Agata," he said in a sharper tone than usual. "Why dig it up now?" "It just felt familiar," she replied carefully. "That woman was obsessed," he muttered. "She even drove me crazy with it for 5 years. And then," Agata finished for him, "then Philip threw me out. Said he needed a real family. Called me useless." Something in the doctor's face shifted. He glanced at the children playing nearby, then back at her. His gaze turned heavy, full of old regret. He stayed silent for a long time, staring at one spot. Agata didn't rush him. She could feel he was wrestling with something. Finally he sighed deeply. "I must have been an old fool," he said quietly. "I thought it was just some woman's hysteria, that it would blow over. But it didn't. It turned into this." He looked straight at her now. No professional detachment left, only exhaustion and guilt. "This was 7 or 8 years before your divorce. Bronislava came to me, alone without her husband. She had a whole folder of Philip's medical tests, old and new. I don't know how she got them, but she kept pestering me. She was convinced Philip had fertility problems, that he'd never be able to have kids. I checked the papers. Nothing too serious. Sure, the numbers weren't perfect, but that's the case with half of all men. It didn't mean anything. I told her exactly that. But she didn't care. She was relentless. She kept saying she couldn't allow the Belyakov family line to end with her son. Then, she started asking about sperm donors and artificial insemination. She wanted the contacts of clinics that could do it. When she started talking about other options, if official methods didn't work, I lost my temper. I told her to stop this nonsense and stay out of her son's personal life. I practically kicked her out of my office. I thought that would be the end of it. I dismissed it as the crazy idea of an overbearing mother. I even forgot about it. And when I later heard Philip had married you, I was relieved. I thought, good, now she'll leave him alone. Then I heard you had no children, and later that he'd thrown you out." He paused, and a terrible realization spread over his face. "And now you tell me about this diary and Theo, and how this obsession of hers went back 30 years. My God, I didn't understand. She didn't just lose her temper, she had a plan. She always had a plan." Agata felt frozen. The picture was coming together far too quickly, and it was horrifying. Bronislava hadn't guessed Philip might be infertile. She was certain of it, and she refused to accept it. She had been looking for a secret solution long before Agata ever failed to get pregnant. Long before she was called useless and thrown out. Her exile wasn't a sudden reaction to having no grandchildren. It was part of something bigger, darker, and planned. If Bronislava didn't find her answer in a donor clinic, then where did she find it? And what role was Agata meant to play in this plan? Agata left the doctor's office in a daze. She thanked him, took the children by the hand, and stepped outside. The sunny day felt too bright, and the sound of Misha and Masha's laughter seemed far away. One thought pounded in her head. She had a plan. She always had a plan. As Agata walked home on autopilot, the doctor's words, Uliana's panic, and the diary entries merged into one terrible picture. Bronislava had been sure Philip was infertile, but she still wanted a Belyakov heir. Cost. The heir had to carry the Belyakov name. And if an official donor left a paper trail, what could be more discreet? Then the thought hit her like a jolt of electricity. Belyakov blood. The Belyakov name. Vladimir, Philip's cousin. A man who'd always lived in his more successful cousin's shadow, but still had the same surname. Cold sweat ran down her back. She stopped dead in the middle of the street. Memories flashed. Little moments she'd ignored before. Vladimir always being nearby, overly polite, showing up at the perfect time. She'd assumed it was just family friendliness. But what if it was something else? Her mind raced, replaying the last months of her marriage, searching desperately for a detail. Any detail that could confirm the awful suspicion growing inside her. She remembered the summer house. About a month before she was kicked out, Bronislava had thrown a big party for her business partners. There was lots of alcohol, loud music, and constant commotion. That night, Philip was not himself. He seemed tense, and after one of the toasts, given by Vladimir wishing for future heirs, Philip started drinking non-stop. He drank quickly, glass after glass, like he was trying to drown something out. By the middle of the evening, He was completely out of it, just sitting in a chair with an empty look in his eyes. Bronislava walked over to him, shook her head and muttered something like, "Falling apart again. Useless." Agata started feeling uncomfortable, because of the tense atmosphere, her drunk husband, and all the noise. Her head began to ache badly. She wanted to leave, but Philip had the car keys, and he was in no state to drive. That's when Vladimir appeared beside her. "Agata, you don't look well," he said, pretending to be concerned. "Let me get you some water. Bronislava has a special herbal mix for headaches." He brought her a glass of water. She remembered it tasted bitter. She took a few sips, but instead of feeling better, her head began spinning even more, and her legs felt weak. "You need to go home and rest," Vladimir said firmly. "Come on, I'll drive you. I'll leave my car here and pick it up in the morning. The guys will get Philip home later." He sounded so confident and caring that she agreed. She remembered him leading her to his car, holding her hand tightly. His hand on her waist, helping her into the seat. His fingers staying on her shoulder longer than necessary. It made her feel uncomfortable. She felt vulnerable and weak, but blamed it on her headache and dizziness. On the way, he spoke in an encouraging tone, saying Philip just needed rest, that business was stressful. She barely listened. She only wanted to get home and lie down. Vladimir walked her right to her apartment door. She thanked him and quickly locked the door behind him. At the time, it had just felt like an unpleasant night. Her drunk husband, a bad headache, and a bit too much friendly attention from her husband's cousin. But now she saw it differently. Philip had been deliberately made drunk. She had been given strange water that made her feel worse. And Vladimir had been there, ready to help. What would have happened if she hadn't locked the door so quickly? What if she had been even weaker and more disoriented? Her chest went cold at the thought. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a plan. A disgusting, calculated plan. And Bronislava had been the mastermind. But for now it was only a suspicion, memories, feelings. She needed proof. When she got home, she put the kids to bed and opened her old laptop. All her archives were there. Photos from her past life. She searched for the folder called Summer House. September. She opened it. Dozens of photos. Guests with glasses, barbecue, Philip drunk in his chair. She clicked through them one by one, finding nothing suspicious. She was about to give up when she noticed one picture. It looked almost accidental, probably taken by a guest. In the foreground, herself and Vladimir standing by the door. She looked tired, and he was leaning in, speaking to her, holding that same glass of water. It was an ordinary photo, but something made her stop. Behind them, on the wall of the veranda, hung a large decorative mirror in an iron frame. In that mirror, you could see the reflection of the house's hallway. Agata zoomed in on the image. Her heart began to race. She zoomed in again and again until the picture started to break into pixels. Even so, she could still see it. In the dark doorway of the corridor stood a figure. A woman's figure. It was Bronislava. She wasn't part of the celebration. She stood in the shadows, watching Agata and Vladimir. And on her face there was no concern for her daughter-in-law, who had just fallen ill. Not even a hint of sympathy. Her expression was cold, focused, and predatory. Like a scientist studying lab mice in a maze, she didn't just know what was happening, she was controlling it. She was waiting for the result of her experiment. This was it. Solid proof. The black and white reflection in the mirror showed the truth. Everything suddenly made sense. Bronislava's plan was simple but monstrous. She had decided to use Agata as an incubator. And for the donor, she had chosen her nephew Vladimir, who had the right bloodline. She had created a situation where Agata's drunk, incapacitated husband was out of the way, and the weak, confused wife was left alone with a caring relative. Bronislava had personally watched it all happen. But the plan had failed. Something went wrong. Maybe Agata wasn't as weak as she thought. Maybe Vladimir didn't go through with it. Believing her plan had failed, and thinking Agata was useless, Branislava told her son to throw her out. She didn't know that, at the very moment she gave up on her daughter-in-law, Agata was already pregnant, not by Vladimir, but by her own supposedly infertile son. 3 years later, Agata returned with 2 children in her arms. For Branislava, it was a shock, living, breathing proof that her scheme had failed. She decided the twins must be Vladimir's, thinking her plan had secretly worked, but the results had slipped from her control. That's why she started shouting that they were someone else's children. That's why she tried so hard to deny them. And that's why Uliana, her new puppet, was so terrified of a DNA test. Because it would prove the twins weren't Vladimir's, destroying the entire web of lies Branislava had built for years. Agata leaned back in her chair. Her ears rang. The monster she feared turned out to be even worse than she'd imagined. Now she knew its name. She knew its plan. And she had a weapon. A small photo, the reflection in the mirror. The reflected truth. She sat in front of her laptop, staring at the enlarged image. The cold fear in her chest turned into an icy, crystal-clear rage. She saw it all now, the mechanism, the lies. She wasn't just a victim of family drama. She had been chosen as a vessel, an anonymous incubator for someone else's plans. And when she was deemed defective, they threw her away like broken furniture. But they were wrong. She wasn't broken. Now she had everything she needed to destroy their world. The diary, the doctor's confession, and the photograph. But how? Go to the police. They wouldn't care about an old family scandal. Tell Philip. He'd never believe her. His mother was his greatest authority, and he was too weak to stand against her. She needed something else. Not just a trial but a public judgment. One Branislava would never recover from. Then the idea hit her. Her bakery in Yaroslavl often hosted charity events. It was a great way to draw attention and do good at the same time. What if she held something similar here, in her hometown? A charity auction for the local orphanage. It would be an event the city's elite couldn't ignore, especially the Belaikov family, who loved to flaunt their reputation for charity work. They'd have no choice but to attend. Branislava, Philip, Uliana, Vladimir. They would all walk into their own execution. It would be her stage, her theater. Her mother was already feeling better, moved from intensive care to a regular ward. With her father and old friends supporting her, Agata threw herself into preparations. She found a small but elegant banquet hall, and arranged for local artists and craftsmen to donate items for the auction. Agata sent out the invitations. The name, Agata Polikova, formerly Belikova, caused a stir. Everyone wanted to see the woman who came back with children and sued her ex-husband. Curiosity and a hunger for gossip. The best bait. She worked like a machine. During the day, she handled the event preparations. In the evenings, she spent time with her mom and kids. She had no room for fear or doubt, only cold calculation. She was preparing for the biggest battle of her life. The night before the auction, Agata came home late, exhausted. Her father had already put the kids to bed. She sat in the kitchen, sipping cold tea, going over her plan for the 100th time. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. A soft, almost panicked knock on the door made her jump. She looked through the peephole. It was Uliana. She was standing there without a coat, just a dress, her face streaked with tears, makeup smeared, hair messy. She looked like someone on the edge of a breakdown. Agata opened the door. "What now?" she asked tiredly. "Did they bring more money?" Uliana didn't answer. She walked in, sat at the kitchen table, buried her face in her arms and started crying. Not quiet tears this time, but loud, shaking sobs that racked her whole body. Part of Agata wanted to throw her out, but another part saw not a rival, but a broken, terrified woman. "Calm down," Agata said more gently than she intended. "You'll wake the kids." "What happened?" Uliana lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen. "She knows," she whispered. "About the auction. She said if I'm not there tomorrow, smiling and behaving, she'll destroy me. Destroy my family, my father." Uliana broke down again. "I can't live like this anymore. This isn't life. It's a prison." Agata poured her a glass of water. Drink and explain everything. What does she know? What are you so afraid of? Uliana took a few shaky sips. My father, he had big business problems. Huge debts. Bronislava Arkadyevna offered to help. She paid everything off. And in return, I had to marry Philip. So it was a marriage of convenience. Not surprising. It was just a contract, Uliana continued. I had to be the perfect wife, give him an heir, strengthen the family's image. Philip didn't care, he just does whatever his mother says. He's empty inside. She gave a bitter smile. I thought I could handle it. But I didn't know what I was walking into. She controls everything, what I wear, what I eat, who I talk to. I'm her doll. Her perfect daughter-in-law project. She paused, bracing herself. Then you came back. With kids. Her voice shook. She went crazy. She screamed you'd ruin everything, that people would doubt Philip could even have children. So, she came up with this. Uliana's eyes pleaded for understanding. She made me to shut everyone up to prove her son was fine, since his new wife was pregnant so quickly. Agata's stomach dropped. I'm not pregnant, Agata. The words hung in the kitchen like a bomb. What? Agata whispered. Uliana stood up and unzipped the side of her elegant dress. Underneath was a harness. She unfastened it and took it off, revealing a large, realistic fake belly. Silicone prosthetic. She set it on the table. Her real stomach was completely flat. Agata stared at the thing on the table, then at Uliana, speechless. This entire show had been a lie. She bought it in Moscow, Uliana said quietly. Made me wear it, go to her doctor who confirmed the pregnancy. She planned to announce the baby's birth, then say it died or make up something else. Just to buy time, just to destroy you and your truth. Uliana sat back down, drained. I can't anymore. I'm afraid of her, but I can't live like this. Tomorrow she'll make me go to your auction, smile, and show off my fake happiness. I want it to end. Please finish her. Burn her down. In that moment, Agata realized she had found the most unexpected and most powerful ally she could have hoped for. She looked at the woman she once thought was her rival, and saw not an enemy, but another victim, trapped in a different kind of cage. Both of them had been targeted by the same monster. Now it wasn't just her anymore, it was the two of them against that woman. And tomorrow's verdict would be final. Agata didn't sleep all night. After Uliana left, she sat in the kitchen, staring at the silicone pregnancy belly on the table. That piece of plastic was the perfect symbol of Bronislava's madness, her desperate, cruel lie. Agata's plan had changed. It was sharper now, harsher. She didn't just have proof of an old scheme anymore. She had a ticking time bomb. The next evening, the banquet hall was full. The city's elite had gathered. Officials, businessmen, their elegantly dressed wives. They were all there to witness the scandal disguised as a charity event. Agata could feel their curious, judgmental stares and hear the whispers, but she didn't care. She was calm. It was that icy, ringing calm that comes right before you jump into the abyss. She spotted them immediately, sitting at the main table in the front row. The Belikov family. Bronislava, in a dark wine-colored evening gown with a flawless hairstyle, sitting straight and proud like a queen. Next to her was Philip, in an expensive suit, wearing a stiff, polite smile. On his other side was Uliana, in a flowing dress that carefully hid her pregnancy. Her face was pale as a sheet, but she was holding herself together, just as she'd promised. A little farther away sat Vladimir with a glass of champagne, smugly scanning the room. They looked like the picture of success, an ideal family. The auction began. As the organizer, Agata was expected to give the opening speech. She stepped onto the small stage and stood before the microphone. Every eye in the room turned to her. She noticed Bronislava give the slightest smirk, probably expecting her to beg for sympathy or say something pathetic. Agata looked around the room, calm and steady. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to everyone who came tonight to support our children's home, She began in a clear, confident voice. She spoke a few general words about compassion and helping children, then paused. You know, children are the most precious thing we have, our future, our legacy. But sometimes, that desire for a legacy turns into a dangerous obsession. So dangerous that people are willing to destroy other lives to get it. The room fell into tense silence. Bronislava's smile faded. She sensed something was wrong. 3 years ago, Agata continued, her voice turning harder, in this very city, I was publicly called useless, because after 5 years of marriage, I hadn't given birth to a child. My husband, the man I loved, stayed silent. And that same evening he threw me out, because his mother decided he needed a real family. Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Philip and Bronislava. Philip hunched his shoulders. Bronislava sat frozen, her eyes burning with anger. I left, Agata went on, ignoring the noise. I started a new life. But recently I had to come back, and I discovered a terrible truth. It turns out I wasn't called useless for no reason. My dear mother-in-law, Bronislava Arkadyevna Belikova, had long believed her own son was infertile. Agata locked eyes with Bronislava. And she didn't just believe it, she acted on it. She came up with a secret plan and she carried it out. She decided that I, her daughter-in-law, should have an heir, not from her son, but from his cousin Vladimir Belikov, to keep the bloodline pure and the family name intact. The whole room gasped. Vladimir jumped to his feet. That's a lie. Crazy talk. She's just trying to get revenge, he shouted, his face turning red. Is it a lie? Agata asked calmly. Are you saying there wasn't an evening at the country house where you deliberately got my husband drunk? Are you saying you didn't give me water with a strange taste that made me dizzy? Are you saying Bronislava Arkadyevna wasn't watching us from a dark hallway, making sure her plan worked? She pulled out her phone and showed a photo on the big screen behind her. A reflection in a mirror, with Bronislava's cold face staring at the scene. Vladimir went pale. He looked at the screen, then at Bronislava, searching for support. But she stayed silent, her face hard as stone. Then Uliana stood up. All eyes turned to her, her pregnant wife. Slowly, almost like in a dream, she took off her light shawl. Then she placed her hands on her dress, took a deep breath and yanked it up. Under the dress, nothing. Just her slim figure and a completely flat stomach. The room froze for a moment, then exploded. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. People stood up, pointing fingers. Phone cameras flashed. This whole pregnancy is a lie. Uliana yelled, her voice booming through Agata's microphone. She made me do it. Bronislava forced me to wear a fake belly to make it look like her son was fertile, and to humiliate Agata. It was over. The scheme had been exposed for everyone to see. Vladimir realized it was finished. His protector destroyed. He sat down, covered his face with his hands, and mumbled to himself. Bronislava's reputation burned to ashes in seconds. She sat there, in the chaos and roaring voices, staring at one spot. Her empire of lies and manipulation collapsed in front of the whole town. Agata let them soak in the scene for a few seconds. Then she turned to the last person, Philip. He sat there stunned, looking from his mother, to Uliana's flat stomach, to the broken Vladimir. He didn't understand. He was just a spectator at the ruins of his own life. Agata walked over to his table, leaned in and said quietly, but clearly enough for him to hear. She lied to you about everything, Philip. Especially about yourself. She lifted her phone again, but this time the screen showed something else. A small white pregnancy test with 2 bright lines. I took this test the morning of Alexei's party. Long before the night at the country house. Long before your cousin ever touched me. She was wrong. Philip, you were never infertile. Then she took a folded piece of paper from her bag and placed it in front of him. These are DNA test results I took last week. For myself, not for the court. You can be sure. Misha and Masha are your children. The real heirs of the Belikov family. The ones you threw out on the street with their mother. She stood up straight. She looked at his face, broken, full of pain and realization. But she felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, just emptiness. 3 years ago that man stopped existing for her. She turned around and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back to see the reporters crowding around the Belikovs' table or the security guards trying to restore order. She simply walked through the crowd, which parted for her like the sea before Moses. She stepped out of the stuffy hall into the fresh night air and took a deep breath. It was over. The next day, she took her mother home from the hospital. A week later, when the scandal had quieted down, she picked up Misha and Masha and went back to Yaroslavl, to her bakery, to her own life. She never heard from the Belikovs again. Only bits of gossip reached her. How Bronislava sold her house and left town, how their business collapsed, how Uliana filed for divorce, and how Philip started drinking. But that was no longer her story. Back in her apartment above the bakery, the first thing she did was take an old worn diary of Anna Sergeyevna and the photo with the mirror reflection out of her suitcase. She didn't tear them up or burn them. She just put them in a box with other useless things and pushed it onto the farthest shelf. The past was buried. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, she picked up her phone, found the contact saved as ex-husband for her lawyer's use, and without hesitation pressed delete. The name vanished from the screen. She set the phone down, walked to the window, and looked out at the lights of her city, her future. She was free. That's how Agata's incredible story ended. A story about how one cruel word, reinforced by cowardly silence, can destroy a life. But also a story about how, from the ashes of destruction, amazing strength can be born. We've followed Agata through humiliation, loneliness, fear, and finally to her triumph. But the main question remains. What is worse, active, deliberate cruelty like Bronislava's? Or the quiet, passive betrayal of a weak man like Philip, whose actions left Agata with her deepest wound? People respond to betrayal in different ways. Some break, some forgive, and some, like Agata, turn their pain into armor and a weapon. She didn't just survive. She came back to restore justice and protect her children. Her public revenge was brutal, but was it unfair? And perhaps the most unexpected twist was the alliance between Agata and Uliana. 2 wives, 2 rivals, 2 victims of the same monster, who came together against a common enemy. This shows that sometimes the most surprising allies appear where we expect only hostility. We'd love to know what you think. Which of the characters made you feel the strongest emotions? Sympathy, anger, or something else? If this story touched you, give it a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more gripping real-life dramas. At the end of this video, a window will pop up in the center of the screen. Click it to watch more of our most captivating stories.